Was Howard Phillips Lovecraft a racist? I've done a handful of Lovecraft readings for my channel so far, but none of those works have yet touched on what makes Lovecraft such a controversial figure in modern context: his xenophobia. I think it's important to learn about this before moving on to some of his best works, because unfortunately some of his best works are marred by some pretty cringe-worthy passages. So, was Lovecraft a racist? Yes, he was! Lovecraft made his beliefs known in several of his stories and letters to friends, and I would even go so far as to say that racism played a big part in the creation of his unique brand of cosmic horror. Lovecraft saw mankind in levels, and if you look at some of his most popular stories, the horror stems from creatures who are a level above man, a level greater than his white educated protagonists. And it's important to know why his brain worked this way. Many Lovecraft fans will defend him by saying his racist views were just a product of the time. This was common 100 years ago, right? That isn't quite accurate. Lovecraft's views were strong enough to make it to his pen and then the page multiple times, and this racism was pretty rare in published stories at the time. Although, to be fair, he reserved his strongest statements for personal letters. Lovecraft was born into an aristocratic family that quickly deteriorated because of mental health problems and financial mismanagement. Both of his parents were committed to a mental institution and died there. After this, Lovecraft struggled to keep food on the table as a writer. I don't think this lot in life made a lot of sense to Lovecraft. He moved to New York with high hopes to be with his wife, but these hopes quickly turned to desperation as his wife lost her business and became ill. He had to work extra jobs to support her, and on top of it all, his house was burglarized. The issues split the couple apart. Lovecraft seemed to put the blame on the minority population around him. His short story, The Horror at Red Hook, is basically a culmination of his hatred for foreigners in New York and his regret of ever having moved there in the first place. But Lovecraft's problems were no one's fault, really. Like his cosmic creations, his lifelong misfortune was beyond his understanding or control. It's possible he eventually realized that, too. One of the most important facts about Lovecraft's racism is that it probably tempered over time. While the young Lovecraft started his writing career with such greats as... oh boy. This fiery racism seemed to all but fade away by the end of his life. Lovecraft was a very prolific letter writer, and loved to engage in debates and talk about politics and race with his correspondents. He wrote about some changing views in a letter in 1936, a year before dying from cancer. He said, "I used to be a hidebound Tory simply for traditional and antiquarian reasons. The Depression jolted me out of my lethargy and led me to re-examine the facts of history in the light of unsentimental scientific analysis, and it was not long before I realized what an ass I had been." Later in his life, when his friends would try to start a race debate with him, he would never bite. It's possible he simply grew out of his views. My favorite example of someone whose racist beliefs faded with time is a senator from my home state of West Virginia, Robert C. Byrd. In his 20s, Byrd started a chapter of the Ku Klux Klan in the state. He even admits that the KKK launched his political career because he was drawn to the organization as a natural leader and was unanimously elected as its top officer. Over the years, his views changed. He stopped paying his dues to the KKK and eventually dropped membership altogether. Later in life, he openly decried the Klan and said his involvement was triggered by an immature outlook. Byrd died at age 92 as one of the most celebrated senators and West Virginians of all time, and this was the guy who once filibustered a civil rights bill. People change as the world changes, and I believe Lovecraft was one of those people too. If he had lived past the age of 46, would he have made a statement like Byrd's? I often wonder how Lovecraft would have reacted to the 60s and 70s in America, and where his writing might have gone in that time. But we'll never know. All we have are the stories and letters he left behind. Those are his legacy. Is that legacy tainted? It's up to you to decide that, listener. I plan to release some more Lovecraft audiobooks coming up, including the author's most famous work. So stay tuned.